Hi, everybody. Thanks for listening to us. We're going to talk a little bit about trends in housing, trends in demographics, trends in real estate, and how this is going to affect the design world and the economy at large. And so what we're going to kind of start with is some trends in housing. And I don't need to tell anybody in New York City that real estate is incredibly expensive and continuing to get more expensive. Cheryl, can you tell me a little bit about some of the trends that your team has seen at Zillow and how that's affecting the market at large?
Yeah, so it's been a really tough housing market in the past few years, and if we look back to, say, the Great Recession, we know that the housing market has recovered and done more than that. If we look at some of these graphs here, we see that first-time homebuyers and, say, millennials are having a really tough time because that orange line is wage growth, which has been pretty flat, and that blue line is home value growth, which has really far outpaced wage growth. Years of accumulating home value growth has actually really made it hard for first-time home buyers. So that's also true with rents. We've seen that with rents, that number has also outpaced it. It's kind of normalizing now. But the truth is, affordability is a major issue right now in the housing market. And not only that, but since the Great Recession, we've sort of underbuilt housing. So obviously, we're still catching up with construction, and that means we have very little supply out there. So that's pushing up prices. It's making it really hard for people to find a place to live. And this is just sort of setting the scene in kind of understanding what the challenges are for people. And so, it is easy to kind of rag on millennials, but one question we always have is it really that much harder than it was a generation ago? So this graph is actually looking at 30 years ago to now, how many more years will it take to save for a down payment? And if you look at the top of the graph, you see places like Los Angeles and San Francisco, 9.5 years longer, 8.5 years longer. San Jose's not even on that, that's 13 years longer. So right now, if you're sort of an average income earner in one of these markets, in LA or San Francisco, it's going to take you 18 years to save for a down payment. So really tough out there. And at the same time, we have student loan debt. Average student loan debt is $350 a month payment. And total student loan debt is something like $1.6 trillion. And I was kind of like, that's really big. How big is that? And that's basically equivalent to the GDP of Canada back in 2017. So it's really tough out there. There's a lot of headwinds for young people and millennials. And so, a story we've heard a lot is that, millennials are still living in their parents' basement, they're still living at home. And while it's kind of true, there's actually a lot of people that are under the age of 34 still living at home in markets that are, of course, expensive. So the more you pay in rent, from your wages, the higher the likelihood you're gonna actually have to stay at home. But that could be a good thing. You could be saving for a down payment. You could be saving to rent later on your own. We also know that, people have been coping in different ways. So a very obvious way to cope is to double up, get a roommate, get two roommates, whatever it is. And in general, that's going to save you money, right? So that's sort of an obvious solution. It's something we've seen for a long time, and that's why we have people always looking online to find roommates, to save some money. And so we have actually seen that young people are taking longer to kind of strike out on their own, so not living with roommates, just maybe living with a partner, but if they're going to live on their own, back in 1980, people would do that maybe if they got a college degree right after college at the age of 23. Now it's after age 26, so it's taking a little bit longer. So we're seeing that it is more difficult for people. And one of the things that we're seeing that's really uncommon is that people are kind of trying to cope in different ways that we haven't really seen before. So there are actually a lot more people in the last 10 years or 20 years. We've seen more married couples taking on roommates, both married homeowners and married renters. So that rate has actually doubled since 1995. And it's very obvious that it's much more prevalent in places that are expensive. So in your San Franciscos, in your Honolulus, in your Orange counties. So, the more you're going to end up paying for a mortgage, the more you're going to end up probably having to take on a roommate if you're a married couple. So I think some of these kind of creative solutions that people are doing
really speak to some opportunities that we're seeing in the market. And Patrick, I know you've covered things like companies that work on co-living and things like that. And the reality is that it is really unaffordable out there. The reality is that people actually really need to figure out ways to kind of cope with this expensive market. And consumer tastes are changing. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what you've been seeing.
Yeah, no, and co-living is definitely an example of people feel like, I need to be in cities where the jobs are, it's really unaffordable. How can we find a solution or sort of a real estate opportunity to create low-cost living for people or lower-cost living for people in cities? So one of the ideas is co-living. And the basic premise here is that everyone has a smaller sort of personal bedroom and you share common space. You'll have a three-story apartment building in New York gets converted to have, say, 20 residents and shared kitchens and common rooms. And what you're seeing here is, like, since this trend kind of started a couple years ago, it's really starting to grow. And it's again an example of people are taking longer, especially the millennial generation, to reach all these sort of life landmarks, getting married, getting a house, having kids. In 1990, the percentage of 18 to 34-year-olds that were married was 52%. In 2015, that's down to 38%. So people are living single longer, living in cities longer, and that's kind of what co-living is trying to present an opportunity for where these people can live. So what you're seeing kind of changing as this market evolves, we can go to the next one, is that it's sort of getting more ambitious. Companies like Common would start with 20 or 30 unit buildings that they convert. Now you're seeing something like this, a company called Star City. They're very active on the West Coast, and they're starting to build ground up, 10, 15-story buildings that'll hold hundreds of residents instead, and trying to basically, scale up and get out of that just niche of young millennial professionals. You're seeing some of these companies try and build, say, housing for families, or they're trying to build more affordable units. They're trying to get a bigger mix of people. It's again just like a huge example of, how can we find affordable housing in cities, which is really becoming a crisis in the country. Now, kind of underscoring that need and move back to the cities, Cheryl, I'm curious, we've seen this downtown renaissance be a big story for 10, 15, 20 years. I'm curious, as you see millennials sort of grow up, get married, have kids, get to that point where many of the previous generations move out to the suburbs, do you see that continuing? Are they going to do sort of what their parents and grandparents did?
Yeah, I think the story of millennials and young people wanting to live in cities, especially, after that big rise of suburbanization and people kind of re-embracing the city, is certainly a trend. But, the data actually tells us that millennials, as they get into the age where they're buying homes, even though it's happening later, as they start having children and wanting more space, they do actually still want that single family home. Millennials do have a little bit more of a preference for, say, townhomes than previous generations. You can find those in suburban areas as well as urban areas. But we do tend to see that they still want to live with a little more space. They actually prefer suburban areas. But I think there's kind of two things that are worth noting. One of them is that suburban areas have actually changed a lot recently, right? Suburban areas have become higher amenity. It is easier to get to them through both public transportation as well as sort of, ways that you can just, call a ride now. So you can go in and have dinner and drinks in the city and go back home, and you don't have to worry about it that much. So suburban areas have sort of transformed a little bit to cater to the needs of people who are used to living in cities. But, I do think that as people age, they will like to move into suburbs, but we do see that young people right now, especially if they're single or if they're someplace they really want to live near the fun stuff before they settle down, they love cities and they love those amenities. We're seeing that you are showing these co-living spaces in some of the most expensive areas, right?
Right.
So this is definitely true.
Yeah, I think it's like a matter of sort of reality catching up with preference. I think the difference perhaps is that this generation, wants to stay in the city and just when they get to that point, they kind of can't afford it. Again,
right.
Underscoring the affordability issue.
Exactly. And I think, we've been focusing kind of on young people and millennials, but another big demographic shift that we're seeing right now is actually baby boomers sort of aging into retirement, aging into the time where they sort of tend to downsize, and I was just wondering if we can kind of talk through what that means for, what we're seeing in terms of the future of real estate. Yeah.
So this is a really kind of telling graph, or map rather. The amount of counties in the country where the majority of the population is over 50, and you see that rapidly spreading on the right side, especially in rural areas. The reality is that we talk a lot about millennials, but the demographic shift happening with seniors is perhaps just as important or even more important. Demographers call this the silver tsunami. And to give you some facts to sort of back that up, the amount of 65 or older Americans will increase 90% between 2010 and 2040. And by the year 2035, 1 in 3 households will be headed by someone 65 or older. That's a population of about 79 million people, or roughly the population of the country of Turkey. This is a huge shift that's going to have massive ramifications across housing, design, and real estate. What does that mean? We're going to see a lot of people need increased healthcare and caregiving, of course. But in terms of like design and housing, a lot of these older Americans are going to want to stay in their house. So aging in place is going to become a huge thing. It already is, but it's only going to grow. We're going to see extensive spending and sort of development of new ways to renovate, new ways to create housing that's going to affect people as they get older, who are going to have mobility issues, who are going to have physical issues, who are perhaps going to have dementia and Alzheimer's issues. These things are all really important to sort of how housing evolves. Looking at a bigger sense, we're going to have issues where, transportation. If you look at this map especially, you see a lot of these areas where the population's aging quite rapidly in rural areas where population's very spread out. How do these people get to the doctor? How do they see their family? How do they connect with their community? These are really big issues and challenges, and there's going to take a lot of sort of work for people to sort of figure out how to best solve them. In addition, you're seeing a lot of investment in especially sort of upscale senior living. Related, which is a company that is behind Hudson Yards. They just signed a deal to do a lot of investment in sort of upscale senior living in cities. There's definitely a lot of real estate developers who are looking at that as a huge opportunity, and you're going to see increased numbers of sort of apartment and condo units that are developed for this sort of particular market. As we talk about this growing senior demographic and sort of changes that are going to happen to the home, there's also sort of this issue of smart home technology, right? Like this is also part of the solution. These voice assistants going to be things that help and make the home more interactive and make it easier for people to get around. I'm wondering if you could talk to, in sort of a bigger general sense, how some of this technology is impacting the home, how it's evolving, how it's changing, how big it is, how big the market is.
Yeah, so I think, this is a good point. Like if we look at this map, like you said, it's more rural areas. It's definitely places where we know is sort of like low density, a lot of single family homes with people really wanting to age in place. We've seen that seniors are downsizing later than they previously have. So the shift is, just about 10, 15 years ago, it's gone from 2005 to 2016. People have shifted from moving to multifamily. So that's either downsizing and moving into apartment or moving into assisted living. It's happening later. People may be working longer, but people may actually just want to stay and age in place. And we see organizations like AARP, really being strong advocates of people wanting to age in place, and certainly smart home technology is something that we think is going to help that, because if we think back to the days when we'd watch, say, commercials on TV late at night and see Life Alert and sort of that poor old person that had fallen and couldn't get up, they really needed to be connected to something where they could call the ambulance. And now we're in an age where, we have homes that are connected. We have smart speakers. If something happens to you, you call out and activate, Google Home or Alexa or whatever it is. Or you could order your groceries from home if you're someone who can't get around and have limited mobility. So I think, this is a huge opportunity, especially in the senior space and also within the young population, just because people are so used to being connected. I don't know if you have any sort of trends on what's going on with the sort of adoption of smart home technology? Because I know it's a really fast moving sort of space in consumer goods at home.
Yeah, I think maybe a couple years ago people thought like Alexa and Google Home Assistant, this was going to be something that was going to drive a lot of commerce, and we haven't yet seen that. The adoption rate on that end is very low, but the adoption rate of this technology is huge. I've seen some people estimate that it's a $5 billion market, that 15% of US homes now have smart home devices. What smart home means can be very tricky. That can mean they have a smart light bulb versus having like an Alexa. But we are seeing these smart speakers become a huge part of the market. I think roughly 66 million households have them. The market grew 40% last year and is forecast to continue to grow quite extensively. So that's going to be a huge thing both in residential homes and also in rental properties. We're seeing that a huge move in sort of providing these kind of electronic digital assistants in rental properties. There's a company called Hello Alfred that works as kind of a digital concierge. Their big idea is that we can help solve all of the little life's problems. We can deliver the package from the mailroom and bring it up to your apartment. And when groceries get delivered, we'll have someone come up there and put it in your refrigerator. And this is all sort of activated by digital technology and voice-activated technology increasingly. And you're seeing apartment owners kind of install this as a way to add these extra amenities. Like the amenities for apartments, a great common space, rooftop pool, that's still great, but the ones people really want now, or seemingly are really growing, are sort of electronic assistants and experiences.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that and say, the idea of smart home tech as an amenity, I think it's still pretty new. We're starting to see that grow. When we sort of survey people to see what they're interested in homes, what they value, we certainly see a lot of the typical amenities that you come to know when people are looking for homes. How many bedrooms does it have? Does it have a garage? Does it have certain kinds of appliances? In the neighborhood, is it in a good school district? Obviously, those things are really important, but when we survey people, about 25% say that smart home technology is very important. Now, that's actually not a lot. It's sort of in line with having a hot tub or a pool. But that's set to grow, and I'll tell you why. Because if you look at, say, younger generations, so millennials, Gen Zers who are starting to look at homes, we actually see that they really value smart home tech. And that's something that about over 40% of them say it's very important compared to other generations. So it's definitely growing. It's becoming an expectation, especially of younger generations. But another reason people may not really say they need that in the home immediately is because it's pretty easy to install, right? I mean, especially if you're talking about something like a smart speaker or whatever it is, or some sort of climate control technology in your home, you may be really focused on getting the home you want and slowly sort of upgrade into that smart home technology. So there's a lot of opportunity there. So that doesn't quite capture exactly how much people value it, but I do think it is set to grow, and the demand is certainly there.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of these things all kind of fit into this idea of, as a lot of the great speakers earlier had spoken about, changes in the way we shop, changes in the way commerce is working. That also is affecting home buying, and I'm curious, how Zillow is sort of evolving and seeing that kind of those trends affect, people's biggest purchase in life.
Yeah, so I think we've seen that consumers now, the consumer taste is really around sort of on-demand everything, right? You should be able to do everything from your phone, call a car to pick you up, order food, whatever it is, and now obviously from these conversations too, shop for furniture, whatever it is. And with retail, that makes a lot of sense. With something like a home purchase or a home sale, that can be really challenging because the transaction is really complex. It is a lot of money at stake, but slowly we're starting to look at different technologies and test new technologies because consumers are really demanding this. So this is actually a demo of our 3D home product. So if you're a seller or if you're an agent, you can easily upload some of these pictures. You just need a camera with sort of a panorama feature. And this, for consumers, it's hard to set up a lot of home tours and make sure you go there when the realtor is there. But if you can do all this discovery from your home on Zillow or whatever site you're using, it really helps you compare. It gives you that convenience. You can spend time in the rooms that you're interested in and really look around and really give yourself that sense of open up your imagination and give yourself a sense of what it's like for your family to live there, what your furniture might look like in there, what your style might look like in there. And I think this is sort of a prelude to more sort of those AR technologies where we're starting to see people kind of test out different staging or furniture or whatever it is. So this is something that is easily integratable now. So this is something that we're working on. And I'm just gonna tease out something else that we've been working on that some of you may have heard of, is that we're actually trying to make the home selling process a lot easier for people too, because of this expectation from people that things should be seamless, things should be easy. But selling a home, if any of you have done it here, is a very stressful process. When we ask people how stressful it is, it's basically in line with planning a wedding or going through a bankruptcy or something really traumatic, right? So, how can we make this easier for people, especially people that may have other stresses on their mind? They may have to move cross country. They need to sell right away. They don't know if they can time it to the same time they need to buy a home, because about 2/3 of home sellers are actually home buyers too. They need to move in somewhere after they sell their home. And so what we're doing is essentially Zillow Offers is a way that if you put in your address and you say you want a cash offer from Zillow within a couple of days, you can get a cash offer, but at the same time you also get connected to a real estate agent who will give you a comp sheet, will give you a sense of how much you might be able to get on the open market for your home. It will be a little bit more, but you will have less control over that process. But this is really about giving consumers the choice and the information they need to make the right decisions for them. And this is something we've rolled out in 17 markets. Yes, we launched in San Diego yesterday. Those orange flags are places that we're going to be in by the beginning of next year. So certainly this idea of on-demand everything is starting to come to transaction processes in homes as well. So this is we're starting to get into sort of what we're looking at in the future. So I think we've covered a lot of ground here, kind of setting the stage for all of this. But I thought maybe we could talk a little bit more about, the next 5 or 10 years in real estate and some predictions maybe that you see that are kind of going to really alter the real estate market.
Yeah, we'll make a couple quick predictions, then we'll open the floor to questions. My big prediction is something that's been happening for a while, but I think is only going to accelerate. This is kind of the growth of smaller cities and mid-sized cities. It's no surprise, you see cities like Austin and Nashville that have really taken off and become just as expensive in many ways as cities like New York or LA. I think you're going to see more and more people as LA, San Francisco, Chicago, Seattle, as all get more and more expensive, as all lose population because people are priced out. You're going to see other cities grow considerably. I think places like like a San Antonio, even like a Memphis, Tennessee, a Louisville, Kentucky. Like you're going to see people who value quality of life, who want to be able to own a home, want to be able to start a business and do it affordably, find these places to be really great options. And with things like remote working, becoming more accepted, and tech companies looking for these markets to expand into, I think you're going to see those markets grow quite considerably.
Yeah, those are good points. And I think one thing I want to address that a lot of people I think have questions about in terms of the real estate market, and obviously could be affect a lot of industries related to real estate and home, is we've heard a lot of predictions about the upcoming recession, right? So, I think the consensus now is that economists say we're probably going to face a recession in the next couple of years. And what does that mean? What does that mean for real estate? What does that mean for home? And I think, what we've seen is that, one big caveat is that the recession, we've had sort of boom years in the economy. It's been going really well. What we're going to see is things sort of correct themselves. And we're certainly not going to see what we saw 10 years ago where, the bottom fell out of the housing market. There were waves of foreclosures. People were underwater. And really, everything ground to a halt. And I think this is different, right? So, I think that's one thing that we want to sort of get out of the way. But at the same time, we have seen indicators in the housing market that things are slowing. So a few things like home sales have slowed down. That's always a leading indicator of things slowing down. We've seen things like permitting or new construction starts also slow. There's a lot of economic uncertainty, so people don't necessarily want to start investing in large real estate projects right away. So what does that mean for people, say consumers? And I think some of that really actually means that you might stay in your home a little bit longer. You might not be ready to sell because it's not a great market to sell in, or you might not be ready to buy because that next house is out of range, and right now you don't know what the economy is going to bring, so you don't want to get into that investment. And I think that actually opens up an opportunity for a lot of people in this room and some of the conversations that have been going on in this conference, which is to say that if people are staying in their homes longer, how can they adapt to staying there longer? How can they do upgrades? How can they really do facelifts to a place that they might actually have to spend a little more time in and make it a place that's going to evolve with them and their families. So I think there are some interesting opportunities also within the sort of smart home tech space. But I think we should be prepared for sort of a change in economic conditions, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there are no opportunities there for this industry. So,
yeah. Great. Well, that's all we got, so I want to see what questions you guys have. Yeah, right there.
Thank you very much. Within the design industry for many years, the do-it-yourselfer has been somewhat maybe the bane of our existence, and something that we've been evolving, and trying to adapt. Is it safe to say that Zillow has, helped the do-it-yourselfer in terms of selling a home? And I'm just kind of curious. Well, I know that Zillow has real estate agents as partners and advertising partners. I would imagine it could also make it easier, especially with your Zillow offer, to just do a for sale by owner, which is real estate version of do it yourself. And maybe if you have facilitated that, do you think you're helping home ownership and sales? Because if a consumer can save 6%, while not dramatic, maybe that's just enough to facilitate a transaction. And do you have data on that?
So I'm not sure I understand your question. But
Don't you think that Zillow's made it easier to sell a home by yourself, as for a seller to sell it without using a real estate agent?
Yeah, so actually we've seen, especially with Zillow Offers, we actually see that most people end up going with an agent in the end. We find that Zillow Offers is for a very select group of people that really need to, because they're making a cross-country move, or they have, kids running around and a lot of pets, they can't actually have people coming through the house all the time. So it isn't always, I would say the majority of people that have come through Zillow Offers have actually gone traditionally through a real estate agent. So it hasn't been a seismic shift, and we don't necessarily see that, but we do see sort of a captive market for Zillow Offers, but it's not for everybody. So I don't really see it sort of like creating a sea change in terms of sort of for sale by owner necessarily. But there is a fee to it, right? And it does, you're not going to get as much as you will on the open market. So there are sort of trade-offs with that. So I don't really see it shifting too much.
More question? Okay. I saw
right here in the front.
Oh, yeah.
But
I ran this way.
Okay, sorry. We'll come back. We'll do this quick.
Hi, quick question for you about...
Who are you?
Hi,
I mean, I
Jeffrey
know.
Burshad from Philip Jeffries Wall Covering. So, question for you about the luxury market in New York City. So there's been a confluence of three things: the mansion tax, lack of foreign money coming in, and then the SALT taxes, which are really hurting our high-end luxury market here. And my question is what your research shows of when we hit bottom and how deep that bottom is.
Wow. I don't know if you have any Zillow-specific research. On my end, I always have this question. I'm a national reporter and not a New York reporter, which is always bad because New York Curb has a really great reputation. Taking all those factors that you just brought up, I think we still have a little bit of ways to go in terms of the bottom. I think especially like we're sort of seeing the impact of the SALT tax sort of slowly evolve. Like I don't think we've sort of fully felt that. But I do think like the foreign money is a huge deal. I think I forget what the figure was with like Chinese investment in the country at large, but I think it was like 40 or 50% less in the last year, something very dramatic. And I think we're going to see more and more of that, and that kind of trickles down. So in terms of like the sort of luxury condo boom that we've had for the last couple of years, I think there's a lot of units on the market that are going to probably stay on the market a little longer than people expected. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I mean, I think from our side, we did see in New York in particular, the luxury real estate market slow down before the actual housing market. So now in the housing market in general, nationally, as well as non-luxury in New York has started to slow down. It's been for the past 18 months or so, but we saw luxury sort of take the lead in that. And there was a lot of supply. There were things like you were saying, policy changes, as well as changes in foreign investment. I do think that unfortunately, we're going to see some of these slowdown indicators continue. So longer days on market, possibly price cuts, which we have been seeing a lot of. And it's not clear to me exactly, but when exactly that's sort of going to moderate. But one of the things now is that a lot of the luxury supply has finally come online, right? So when it started, there was actually still units to come online, and so we knew that was going to be sort of a protracted slowdown. But now, most of the units are online, and now it's really sort of seeing how the market actually clears that. So.